Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. We want to begin by noting something obvious because this is the obvious show. If you live in the United States, you may have noticed that many of our public spaces have become permanent homeless encampments. You see trash-filled tents blotting out what were once green and tidy public parks. You step over vagrants drooling unconscious on the steps of train stations on the way to work. You watch as junkies smoke meth without any embarrassment at all and then yell at pedestrians on the sidewalk, maybe at your children. Everywhere, at every intersection, there are beggars. It's what we used to imagine India was like, but this is not Calcutta. This is New York and San Francisco and Austin, Texas. So the question is, what happened? And the short answer is, our leaders did this. No matter what they tell you, homelessness is not an act of God. It's not the result of economic collapse in this country. America did not run out of housing. Instead, a determined group of well-funded ideologues decided to make it easier to live on the streets in this country while doing drugs. Therefore, many more people now live on the streets while doing drugs. See? Not complicated.
Let them die. Round them up. Put these crackheads and junkies that contribute nothing to society. I mean, like, he didn't even pretend. Like, there was no, at this point, I think he's done trying. Like, why does he have to? Like, he can say whatever the fuck he wants. So, like, he doesn't have to, like, pretend. But I found it, like, really bizarre.
The death of God is about the drying up of a horizon of meaning and of a whole form of human life.
Where do we stand in the illusion it makes? What kind of space are we invited into?
The material relations between people become social relations between things. When we look at toasters, corn, and TVs,
we still, to a large extent, live in the interregnum between worlds, if you will, or between paradigms. Not many people in the history of the world have faced that.
Diet Soap is a Sublation Media podcast. Hi, Lavit. So, Lavit Maas is a social worker living in Los Angeles who works on Skid Row. You've been on the podcast before. You were on well, go ahead and say it. What the hell? Zero Books podcast when I used to work over there.
Is that not, we're not allowed to, is that like the podcast that shall not be named?
I guess
like we're not allowed to say.
No, we're allowed because I just said it. I decided
okay.
I'm not going to hide. But I decided to ask you to come back on because I saw a Tucker Carlson segment. The YouTube algorithm said Doug needs to watch this, and
because you're really a crypto fascist. That's why.
Okay. All right. Fine. That is not the case, Lavit.
Sure. You say that in algorithm.
Jest. Well, okay. So, for whatever reason, the algorithm thought I needed to see the segment on Fox News with Tucker Carlson, and it was entitled "We're Watching Civilization Collapse in Real Time."
Right.
And I thought, I know who I think of first when I think of the collapse of civilization and Western values. My Jewish friend,
crazy
Lavit
Jewish
Maas.
girl. the cultural Marxist that walks among you.
That's right. So, but I thought what he was saying was obviously like way over the top. You were saying he's like a parody of a right winger at this point.
Like, I mean, you hear when people like have these like very terrible ideas about how we should solve the problem of homelessness. They'll at least like drape it as like, well, we're doing this because we care. And like, you like, what did a cop once say to me was like, what you're doing is actually the opposite of caring because what they need is like tough love and discipline. And that's how people get better. So at least they like pretend, but he was literally like, he was basically talking about a final solution. Like, I mean, he was like, let them die, round them up, put these crackheads and junkies that contribute nothing to society. I mean, like he didn't even pretend. Like there was no at this point, I think he's done trying. Like, why does he have to? Like he can say whatever the fuck he wants. So like, he doesn't have to like pretend, but I found it like really bizarre because it's like, most people, I guess, feel that way, but they'll at least be like, and it's because of these liberal policies that people can get better. Like that's normally how they'll frame it.
He did say that, and that was the framing, but it was.
Listen, I'm not trying to be. You're gonna frame this as like I'm an SJW snowflake.
No.
In this case, no. But in this case, the language she used was so crass and like legitimately dehumanizing, like in a way that was like very over the top, like calling people crackheads and junkies and saying they don't contribute to society in a meaningful way, and like just painting everybody with a broad brush in such like a horrific way that like, I mean, that's like a real thing when you use dehumanizing language like that. And it's really easy to commit like violent acts or like, hurt people, vulnerable people, like the people I work with, the people he's talking about, the population on Skid Row. When you call them things like that, I mean, that's like a real thing. Even a police officer told me once, you know why we call people bodies? Because that's what they'll say, right? They're like, this is your body, or that's not our body, or whatever, because it's easier to kill them that way if we have to. Like, that's a real thing.
Yeah, no, I know it is. Hold on. I know it is, but I want to get back to that question about the dehumanizing language that he used, because I think it's important. But I also think like the other part of it that's important is this framing that you said he didn't emphasize it, but I think was for most people going to be what they really got out of what he said, which like, here's an example. He said, like, there was this lawsuit between not just one homeless man named Basil Humphrey, but also
great name,
5 others. Yeah. But 5 others, including a guy named Robert Martin. And the case is called Martin versus the city of Boise. If you look it up, it happened in 2009, happened a long time ago now.
Right.
So, and it was about anti-camping ordinances in the city of Boise, and how these people, Robert Martin, Basil Humphrey, and 4 others were being charged not just once, but over and over again for camping in public property and public sleeping, because they didn't have a place to go for whatever reason. In the case of Basil Humphrey, it was because he'd been kicked out of a shelter, like at a church, because of drunkenness. But for Robert Martin, the shelter he was in had been closed down, and there were other reasons why people were on the street. But Tucker says that the firm that took the case wanted to change vacancy laws in order to increase homelessness. So, like, what do you make of that?
Absurd. I mean, that's such an absurd thing to say, right? And they love to like cherry pick these like very like kind of out of the ordinary things that they see and make it seem like it's a pattern of behavior or like some like pointing to a larger conspiracy. They do the same thing with like, what is it? Like personal injury, for example. Like the right loves to say that like lawyers, which, maybe there's some truth to, like, there's frivolous lawsuits, right? They love to talk about frivolous lawsuits. But the truth is that like, they love to point to that McDonald's case about the lady who sued McDonald's because the coffee was too hot. She got 3rd-degree burns and needed skin grafts. And the reason the coffee was too hot was because McDonald's was saving money by not having to by recycling old beans or whatever. So it wasn't a frivolous lawsuit. So this is the same kind of, I feel like, framework, right? Nobody wants to increase homelessness. That's literally insane. The part that I do think maybe he's right about, and we'd probably agree with, is that there should be absolutely no profit attached to the building projects that require low-income housing, right? So he's right about that. There are definitely big builders that are making a ton of money off of these projects, and that is a capitalist problem. That's a capitalism problem, right? This isn't like people wanting to increase homelessness. This is about people profiting off of a really shitty system that already exists. And if you actually cared, you would make housing free.
Right.
And so
what I thought when I heard him say that about the law firm wanting to to encourage homelessness, the only thing I could think of that would in any way justify that claim is if somehow it was known, or if there have been studies that showed that lifting anti-capping ordinances will increase the homeless population in a city. Like I think that's probably known. Like if you get rid of it, if you let people camp inside the city limits, you're going to see more people camping inside city limits. But what that misses is if you don't let them camp inside city limits, they're still homeless.
Exactly.
They go somewhere else.
Exactly. Yeah. Just because they're out of sight doesn't mean they don't exist. Right. And I think that's like the point that he's missing. And of course he knows that. That's what's so crazy. Is like, not so crazy. Of course we all know Tucker Carlson is not an idiot. Like he knows exactly what he's saying, and he knows that like how to manipulate the statistics and manipulate the information that he has to prove a point that's not a real point, right? Mm-hmm. So of course, like that's the thing is like he just doesn't want to see it. He doesn't really give a shit about actual people experiencing homelessness. It's just he doesn't like it in people in front of businesses or people in front of a pretty park or whatever it is. And I also want to acknowledge too that like two things can be true at once. That like I understand why people wouldn't want that. I don't like looking at it either. It's very upsetting. Like it's a super upsetting thing to see. And like I'd be lying if I said that like there aren't like legitimate concerns about people having that in their neighborhoods. It's a very, very real thing. And it's a very, very real issue. Mm-hmm. However, like the question is, how do you really combat it, right? And how do you like actually give people the services they need and stop this cycle of homelessness and violence? Like that's the truth. Like I think that like I think it's naive for like, I think, and this is a problem on the left too, for a lot of activists to be like, there's absolutely nothing wrong with people living on the streets if that's the lifestyle they choose or whatever, which is also something I hear on the left a lot. Mm-hmm. There is like, it's not okay for anybody. Like it's not an alternative lifestyle choice that like doesn't affect everybody around you. Right. Like, but the truth is that like the way to like help people in this situation is it's not like more regulation and criminalization of homelessness, which is what he's advocating for.
Mm-hmm. Right. No, obviously but I feel like the strength of Tucker's rhetoric is that he aims everyone's attention at something that maybe people on the left aren't wanting to look at too closely, which is that these progressive policies, so-called progressive policies, aren't working. Like lifting anti-camping ordinances does not solve the problem of homelessness, right?
Right.
Or making it easier to get a meal or get medical treatment, even if you're homeless, does not undo the problem of homelessness. And one of the really distressing things I wanted to ask you about this is about the way that cities are spending on public housing. It seems as though even that, providing housing, doesn't quite undo. I mean, if you imagine all the people on Skid Row right now that you know about suddenly being offered an apartment in one of these high rises, and if everyone had an apartment available to them, do you think that would significantly reduce the number of homeless people on Skid Row?
I can't answer. I don't know.
You would think it would, right? I mean, you want to think that 1 + 1 = 2, but it doesn't make it. It's not that simple, right?
No, it's not that simple. I mean, we've talked about that before too, that like people have different needs, and like a lot of people end up on Skid Row because of needs that like are greater than just putting them in an apartment and giving them a key, right? They need support. They need medical care. They need psychiatric care. They need help with substance abuse. Like it's not as simple as like, here's an apartment, good luck, bye. So it's very multi-layered. And I do think though that, we do need more housing, though. That's the
Right,
thing. Too.
yeah,
So that's
right.
like part of it. And the bureaucracy, and I could tell you this, it's like the bureaucracy surrounding getting these low-income apartments is just crazy. Like, it is insane, the amount of paperwork, the back and forth, the documents. Like, I mean, it is just like, holy shit. Like, if you don't have like a case manager helping you, there's no way you'd be able to go through this process alone, especially if you have like any sort of like disability, like or mental health concern. Like, it's really hard. So that needs to go. Like, and I do think that would like improve, but like the people that I work with, the populations that I serve, I mean, like, they need a much higher level of care. And you need to completely destroy the like medical industrial complex. It's like a huge part of it.
Mm-hmm. You mean like the profit
Yes.
making side of the healthcare system?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
I just feel like when you take a look at a given homeless person who's living wherever they're living, whether it's the streets of Portland, downtown Portland, in a tent or on Skid Row, like the problem that they're facing, the immediate one is that they don't have a house to live in and they're in a tent. But there's like so many problems in their background, so problems that led up to that moment,
right,
that it's really difficult to just solve it for them,
right,
or for anyone. And that I feel so, you know, every kind of way that we try to frame the issue sort of misses some other aspect of it. So like if we say, oh, well, the problem is personal trauma, then, and we need to get them psychiatric care, then what that misses is the limits that psychiatric care has. How effective can we be in overcoming trauma? And then also the fact that trauma was created to begin with. Like, where did they come from? Where they were in such violent circumstances that trauma arose. So it's like these deep societal problems that then get expressed as homelessness. And it gives people like Tucker Carlson a way
horrible
to score rhetorical points off of the very people who are trying to address it within the system as it is.
Right.
Yeah.
And I was so deeply like, I mean, you'll probably, again, maybe it's SJW and me, but I found it so repugnant. Like, it was painful to listen to, especially when like you work down there, like, and you feel like he's talking about people that you care about. He's talking about people that you've interacted with that are human, that come from families who are looking for them, have been missing. I mean, I told you yesterday how many people died from fentanyl overdoses. You know, like,
well, you saw 2 people die?
Yeah.
From fentanyl overdoses. Like,
I assume they're fentanyl. I don't know. I assume, but like opiate overdoses. But like one person that we revived he wasn't using opiates. So like my point is that like there's fentanyl and everything. So just, yeah, like, you know, it's just so crass and horrible, and like, you know, and like, I guarantee his audience too has loved ones that are experiencing addiction, that may be experiencing homelessness, that may have had these types of issues. And I wonder how they reconcile even listening to him after that. Like, this is a very universal thing. It crosses all spectrums of everything, class, you know, race, gender, whatever, ethnicity.
I think people tend to blame themselves when things go wrong in their lives. And when it comes to family members, they also blame their family members when things go wrong in their lives. So if you have a brother or an uncle or a sister or whatever who's hooked on drugs and homeless, some part of you might be saying, damn it, what's wrong with them? You know? And also these people who are paying them money to stay hooked on drugs, I hate those people. You know, I could see someone whose family member was doing that who might come to that kind of conclusion.
Right. I can even see that kind of like cognitive dissonance and mental gymnastics. But like when he talks about people being junkies and crackheads and not being contributing anything of use to society. Like, what horrific, how can you talk about people like that? Like, especially when like, and I think that this is something that people with disabilities have had to overcome for a long time. I think it's a disability rights issue when you say that like people with mental health issues or physical disabilities that inhibit them from being able, let's say, to have a job like everybody else can't contribute. Fuck you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what the fuck do you contribute? What do? You sit on TV and talk? Like, are you like, you know, curing cancer? Are you like building things? Oh, you're just like a paid intellectual. Who the fuck are you?
Listen, like, I'm just the guy on YouTube.
I'm just saying.
Oh wait, you're talking to Tucker, not to me. Yeah. No, I agree, but I feel like, I don't know. I feel like you're absolutely right that it's really dehumanizing. It's obviously terribly dehumanizing, but I also feel like a lot of people who are really in those conditions, like, dehumanize themselves or like dehumanize each other as well, and that people want to contribute to society.
That's like part of the cognitive dissonance around this issue, which like completely like alleviates responsibility from like us as a society, and like this bullshit rugged individualism and like social Darwinistic view of the world, which is really evil. Like, I mean, I cannot get down with that. Like,
no, I agree with you, but I mean, we don't live in a society where there can even be full employment, right? So obviously someone has to be unemployed. And I'm not just talking about older people or people who have physical disabilities, but I mean, like, everyone who would like a job in this society right now can't have one. So obviously something's wrong, and you can't blame the individuals for it. But on the other hand, people do have this sort of natural propensity to want to contribute and to judge one another based on their contribution, I think.
But what's the contribution too? Like, I don't know. I feel like that's so relative. Like, are artists contributing? Like,
only if they make money, I guess. Like, no, they're not if they're just sitting around writing poetry that no one wants to hear. I mean, I don't know.
Until they die, and then they're like, you know, oh my God, what a genius.
No, that's true. But like, right.
I just resent that so much. And especially like, I want to know, like, quantifiably, Tucker, what have you contributed? Like, really, aside from like, you know, this kind of like rating system where you sit on TV and talk, but do you build anything?
He's brought Fox News a lot of advertising dollars, Lavit.
Right. So it's like not even, that's some like, you know, he's he's the liberal arts like asshole that he supposedly hates so much. Basically, you might as well have a gender studies degree. You're useless. You don't do anything.
Right. Yeah.
You know, like, for real. I mean, I personally know 3 people that I've worked with who would be much more entertaining to watch on television than Tucker Carlson, and not for reasons that they would be funny, but because they say creative things. They'd be entertaining. They'd be funny. They'd be witty. So let's replace them. Like,
I think I would like to see you. I want you to replace Tucker Carlson on Fox News, Lavit. I want you to, that would be.
I am literally there. Like they make memes about me on a regular. I'm the anti-feminist, anti-SJW meme. That's what I am.
I know, and it would be so much fun to see you take Tucker Carlson's place. I mean, God, it would confirm everyone's worst fears about the world. It's like, sorry, Fox viewers, but due to the deep state, Lavit Maas has replaced Tucker Carlson. And please move closer to your television set so she can watch you.
I would love to be the Jewish nightmare they all want me to be.
Right. So, but okay, so like on the one hand, I'm with you completely about how awful Tucker's language was and dehumanizing it was, and especially when put in the context of like the story of that guy Humphrey. What was his name? Basil Humphrey, where like Tucker's like, well, you know, he got drunk at the shelter and they kicked him out, and then he tried to camp somewhere and the cops came and arrested him for public camping, which is illegal, and that should have been the end of the story. And it's like, well, what do you mean that should have been the end of the story? Basil Humphrey still didn't have a place to sleep.
Yeah.
So the end of the story should have been the cops took him away and put him in jail.
Yeah, that's what he wants. I mean, he says it. I mean, he talks about what's wrong with criminalizing homelessness. I believe he said something.
Well, I think the underlying assumption that maybe he didn't say aloud was if he had to, go to jail or change or get sober, he would have gotten sober. Right.
God,
that's
naive
gotta be I know. I mean, I think that's gotta be the underlying assumption. Especially when you throw in like, oh, this incentivizes drunkenness or incentivizes homelessness.
And that's been like disproven time and time again. Like, and there's a couple things also when he talks about like harm reduction and like shooting galleries and like all this bullshit, which is like proven in like most civilized industrialized nations that have these measures, that's not the case. That it decreases violence, it decreases spread of disease, it decreases the mortality risks associated with homelessness and drug use, and also like it also increases the ability for people to go to recovery. Like, it's just such nonsense. Like, it's not like, you want to talk about science and like evidence-based practice and like all these things. He's just talking out of his ass. He's making shit up. It's like when there were those 2 horrific incidences that happened in LA in the last 2 weeks, which he brought up, that the nurse at Union Station, and then I believe it was a young woman in a furniture store. And then all of a sudden, all people are violent who are homeless. It's so insane. Like, okay, so now because every serial killer is a white man, I guess you all have a propensity for violence, and we should, I don't know. You tell me what would be the solution. I think
you should punish us, Lavit. That's what I think you should do.
But like, it's so absurd. Like, who on earth? Like, how does he get to make these leaps? Why is he allowed to do that? Like, it's so insane. Like, these things happened and they were terrible, but they don't have anything to do with people experiencing homelessness having a higher propensity for violence. In fact, statistically, they need to be worried about us. Like, statistically, they're more likely to be hurt by other people. So, like, for him to just go on TV and just say whatever the fuck he wants, instill fear, and then that poor father was on there talking, about how he lost his daughter, and like, it's just like such a mess. And also, like, these things do matter. They really do, because like, and I think you and I talked about this, and we see differently on this, because you think I'm an SJW or whatever, but like, it does incentivize people to hurt people that are vulnerable because they think that they might be protecting themselves, like, or, there's a lot of stories about people throwing rocks at people who are homeless, people, trying to hurt them. And it's just stories like this, just so dangerous to the most vulnerable.
Well, okay. I don't want to dehumanize anyone. I don't disagree with you fundamentally that his language was dehumanizing. I do wonder whether or not you could say that it was like, if someone heard Tucker Carlson's diatribe against homelessness, that is, I think, increasing across the country in major cities, everywhere. And if you heard that and then went out and threw rocks at the homeless, I would tend to think that there were other things that were going on.
Sure. Okay.
That would motivate that person.
But it does.
But let me just get to, but the point here that I would make is that it seems like we're like, yeah, I don't want to speak so ill of people. And I want most of all to view people who need help and who are kind of symptoms of social problems to be treated as people. Right. But on the other hand, I don't want to minimize what the symptoms are or how bad it is that these things are going on. So like, for instance, I oppose this idea that we should refer to people who are homeless as houseless, because it gets rid of the depth. It flattens out the problem to as if the only problem they have is they don't have a house. They don't have a home. That's the problem. They don't have a way to participate in society in a way that would be meaningful to them. They don't have usually a network of social support that people rely on when they might otherwise become homeless, and that keeps them from being homeless. I feel like the word homeless describes the situation much more fully. And just like shell-shocked is better than, what is it, having post-traumatic stress disorder or what have you. I mean, maybe whatever they're replacing that with now. You see what I'm saying? Like, I like a visceral description.
Sure.
So go ahead.
I don't remember. You interrupted me. So now
No, go ahead and respond to it. Like, why am I wrong to want that kind of visceral?
I guess to me, I don't really care if you describe people as houseless or homeless. Maybe that might make your SJW audience mad at me because they know language matters. But, I do think that there's this tendency, even on the left, to romanticize poverty sometimes and to say like, oh, like, they do have a home. They're not homeless, they're houseless because they live on the street and that's their home. No, nobody wants to live on the street. There is this tendency. I think that part of getting people dignified care and dignify them, and the dignity of living inside and to have everything that everybody else has is to not romanticize the life of living on the street. It is not something like alternative that you just wouldn't understand, Sure, I'm sure that there are people like that live in RVs that are like, this is the way I want to live. I want to live off the grid. Fine. But we're not talking about that, right? We're talking about people who, because of, poverty, trauma, addiction, mental health, physical health, cannot bring themselves out of this horrible cycle of poverty. And to romanticize it and to like glorify it as something other than that, I think it's actually like classist, racist, all of it, because you're basically saying, no, they don't know any better. Like, you just don't get it. Like, like that, that's also a problem on the left that I see like quite a bit. And now I don't remember exactly what.
I know. So we gotta, the problem is like, how do we thread this needle? How do we, on the one hand, speak plainly about the problems that are there and the realities that are there, and at the same time avoid dehumanizing people and create something where create a situation or a conversation where people can feel like they're valued even when their lives are falling apart?
Well, I think I talk about this a lot, which is like dignifying care and making care the care that people need, not stigmatizing it. So if somebody needs to go to rehab, it shouldn't be this like insane process with insurance and like, if you have the right insurance or if you don't, and like, like criminalizing addiction. That's all part of it, right? Like, or like I talked about with the people that I serve that require a certain level of custodial care forever, or for at least a long period of time, to like make it as dignified and loving as you would want for your own family member, I think that's all part of it. I'm just going to mention this just because it was really made me mad too, but this is a little off topic about Tucker Carlson. How dare he talk about the opioid epidemic and talk about people who are addicted to drugs and especially opioids, and not even mention the complete like formulated plan by the Sackler family and big pharma to make this happen, and blame the individuals who are victims of this capitalist big pharma conspiracy that's very real that happened. Like, fuck you. You don't even mention it. Like, fentanyl is like this huge issue now. 2 people died yesterday that I know of. I'm sure there were more. And you're not going to talk about like John Kapoor, who's now serving a 5-year sentence in prison for pushing fentanyl as if it was like a legitimate drug for a headache, knowing full well it could kill people and not caring.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
There's just something wrong with the individual. Like, if you are an addict, then there's something wrong with you as a person. That's the best message he's pushing. Like, you are antisocial, you do not contribute, and you're just like a freeloading asshole.
Well, right.
Sackler family should be in prison.
Right. Obviously, right. I would say that we have to look at what were the incentives for the Sackler family. Why did we
money? That's
right?
capitalism.
No,
right?
but why was it so easy for them to do this shit?
Because we do not prosecute crimes of greed, but we would prosecute the dealer on the street that's selling, whatever, 5 grams of heroin to the person who, may have started on OxyContin because their doctor gave it to them because they had a headache, because that was what happened, right? That's what they were told to do.
I would just want to look into like what was a deregulation around the pharmaceutical industry that went on. Why is, like price fixing seems to be a big problem with pharmaceutical companies. There's got to be like institutional and societal factors that make this kind of shit happen, as well as the people who are individually responsible for it. Right. Like, exactly. Yeah. And so like, that's also what Tucker's trying to do, but he's only pointing in one direction. He's saying
the individual.
No, also the progressive politicians.
Right.
And the real estate companies and the builders and
he's right. He's right about that. Like the big builders and the real estate companies, cut them out, destroy it. We don't want it. We don't want any of it. That's what Eric Garcetti, the mayor of Los Angeles, is notorious for, making deals with these big builders and these, it's horrible. Like, and just like anything, two things can be true at once. He might be right about that, but so what?
Right. Well, yeah, it just, here's, I'll put it to you this way, kind of, maybe we can start to wind it down here, but I notice it in Portland that the way that homelessness is addressed kind of goes through cycles.
Right.
There'll be really punitive legislation and policies put forward, like anti-camping ordinances, and you'll see like structures get built to discourage people from lying down on a park bench or lying in a doorway, and like spikes in doorways and shit like that. That's really, I think, kind of monstrous stuff.
Yeah.
And then after that, you'll see a loosening of these restrictions and an increase in the homeless population. That's certainly what we've seen in the last couple of years. And all the while, the difficulty, like the conditions that produce homelessness, just persist.
Right.
So it seems like there's a sort of failure to address what's happened and what's happening for like decades. And it just cycles through the different sides of the failed options to deal with the problem. And I just wonder, like, if you're aware of people either who are working with homeless people or homeless people themselves who are trying to do something on a deeper level, like organize politically or change their circumstances on a more fundamental level.
Sure. I mean, there's all sorts of organizations that claim to be doing that, right?
Like claim to be. Any that you actually would like endorse yourself that are?
Well, I told you my friend's organization, the Sidewalk Project, are very, very, very adamant about changing policy regarding people who use drugs and in a very real way. And they're harm reduction organizations and they're amazing. But this is one organization and they're doing the best they can. But it's so hard. Like, I mean, you're going against the big builders, big pharma, for-profit healthcare, just people who hate, there's a lot of prejudice against just people experiencing homelessness in general, right?
Also, the need for a disposable group of people who can be in what's called in Marxist talk, the reserve army of labor.
Right.
I mean, that's like where Skid Row came from, was these people who have been brought in on temporary basis to pull skids down the muddy streets. And then they made skids in the streets. And then they, Skid Row developed because they weren't needed anymore. So yeah, I know you're going up against a deep history. I was just wondering like how you see activists dealing with that problem.
I don't know. As you know, I have my own issues with them. Like activists on Skid Row making my job a little harder.
Yeah, talk about that. Go ahead. You could. This is the forum for that.
No, I'm gonna plead the fifth here.
We're all shitlords here. Come on.
I think that there's a lot of different views on mental health, and the way mental health is triaged and treated in this country is, I have to work in the system that we have to help people the best way I know how. And sometimes that doesn't look the way that they might want it to. And sometimes that might involve law enforcement, and they don't like that. So, they don't like me very much sometimes, even though I'm the mental health that they supposedly want responding. But anyway, that's like a whole other thing.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, we can talk about some. You want to talk about that in a private parrot room only Patreon discussion, or should we just do a public facing podcast?
You can decide that. I don't know.
All right. I'll think about that.